The thick, oppressive fog clung to the Atlantic Ocean like a heavy blanket, draping the sea in an eerie silence. It was the kind of fog that turned the world into a monochromatic haze, where the ocean seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions, indistinguishable from the sky. The only sound that penetrated the dense, suffocating stillness was the low hum of the seabird's engine, cutting through the air with its constant rhythmic pulse. It had become almost like a heartbeat, steady and reliable, keeping time with the crew's movements. On board, Captain Thomas Reed stood at the helm, his weathered face etched with the lines of a man who had spent more years than he cared to count on the open water. The salty wind whipped around him, tugging at his jacket, but he paid it no mind. He was used to the elements, the feel of the sea on his skin, the briny air in his lungs. Every inch of his being was attuned to the rhythm of the ocean, to the creaking of the ship, to the waves lapping gently against the hull. He could feel the pull of the tides, the subtle shifts in the wind, the tension in the air. This was his domain. He was at home here. His crew, a group of men he had sailed with for years, moved silently about the deck, their faces grim with the concentration of their tasks. There was no need for words between them. Everyone knew what needed to be done. The nets were being hauled in, the gear checked, the catch sorted. The work was methodical, a process so familiar that it could be done without thinking. And yet the atmosphere felt different today. The fog had grown thicker, wrapping itself around the seabird like a living thing, muting the world outside. It was as though the sea was holding its breath, waiting for something. Louise, the youngest deckhand, had always been the most observant of the crew. She was still learning the ways of the sea, but she had a keen eye for detail. Today, however, she seemed even more alert than usual. She stood at the railing, peering into the thickening mist, her brow furrowed. Her fingers drummed nervously against the metal of the ship as she scanned the water. "Hey, what's that?" she called, breaking the silence. The words cut through the air, sharp and full of urgency. Reed turned, instinctively following her gaze. At first, all he could see was the swirling fog and the grayish waves lapping gently against the hull of the boat. The visibility was poor, but he had sailed through conditions like this before. His eyes narrowed, focusing on the spot she was pointing to. At first, it looked like driftwood, or perhaps a buoy that had broken loose from some ship or dock. A mere piece of debris floating aimlessly in the water, but then it moved. Reed's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't a piece of wood at all. It was something alive, something struggling. The shape began to become clearer, pushing through the waves. With slow, laborious movements, Reed's breath caught in his throat as he recognized the form. A dog. "That's no driftwood," Reed muttered under his breath, his voice laced with disbelief. "That's a dog." The crew members froze, exchanging confused glances. A dog? Out here in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, hundreds of miles from shore? "That can't be right," Mark said, his voice low as he walked toward the edge of the boat. "Maybe it's a stray or—" "No," Reed interjected sharply. "It's a dog, and it's in trouble." The crew moved quickly into action. There was no hesitation in Reed's orders. He had been at sea long enough to know that when the unexpected happened, there was no time to waste. They had to act fast. He barked commands, instructing Mark and Louise to ready the rescue line. They fumbled with the ropes, working together to prepare a makeshift lifeline. As the boat slowly inched closer to the struggling animal, Reed's thoughts raced. How did the dog end up here? Who had it belonged to? Had it been at sea for days, weeks, and most chilling of all, was there anyone else out there with it? As the seabird drew nearer, the dog's movements became even more desperate. It was swimming, weakly now, its limbs trembling, each stroke a battle against the waves. The sea, usually so vast and indifferent, felt alive with tension, as if it too were watching, waiting to see what would happen next. The crew didn't speak. They didn't need to. The urgency in the air was enough to communicate everything they needed to know. The boat's prow slid closer to the struggling dog. With shaking hands, Reed instructed the crew to toss the rescue line. The rope flew through the mist, landing near the dog with a splash. The dog, though weak and exhausted, instinctively grabbed hold of the line, clinging to it with surprising strength. "Pull her in," Reed ordered. The crew worked together to haul the dog aboard, each pull of the line bringing her closer. Her body was limp, her fur matted and sodden from the water, but she was alive. Weak, trembling, but alive. When the dog was finally pulled onto the deck, there was a collective sigh of relief. She was small but strong, the German Shepherd's once gleaming coat now darkened and heavy with salt water. Her ribs were visible, her breath coming in shallow, shaky bursts. She looked up at the crew with wide, scared eyes, her body trembling from exhaustion. Reed dropped to his knees beside the dog, gently placing a hand on her head. She flinched at first, but then relaxed as his touch seemed to comfort her. "You're safe now," Reed murmured, his voice soft but firm. Mark crouched next to Reed, his eyes scanning the dog for injuries. "She's exhausted, but she doesn't seem to have any major wounds. Just tired. Real tired." The dog's eyes remained fixed on Reed as she lay there, her body still trembling. Despite the exhaustion, there was something in her gaze, a flicker, of determination, of strength, that caught Reed off guard. She wasn't just any dog. There was something about her, a will to survive, to be rescued, to keep going. It was as if she knew something that the crew didn't. "She's a fighter," Reed muttered, standing up and signaling to the crew to wrap her in blankets. The dog, despite her trembling body, lifted her head slightly as the warmth of the blankets enveloped her. She gazed at the crew, her eyes wide and searching, as if trying to communicate something that none of them could yet understand. As the crew gathered around the dog, Bella, they did their best to keep her warm and calm, wrapping her in the thick blankets they kept on board for such emergencies. Despite the crew's efforts, the dog seemed far from the peaceful rest they had hoped for. Her eyes darted back and forth, her muscles tight with tension. Every so often, she would glance toward the horizon, ears perked, a subtle alertness in her movements. "She's still awake," Louise observed, her voice softer now with a touch of concern. She knelt beside the dog, reaching out cautiously to stroke Bella's fur. The dog didn't flinch this time, but she didn't relax either. It was as if the exhaustion wasn't enough to quiet the storm inside her. Reed observed the dog closely, the silence around them heavy. His brow furrowed as he watched Bella's eyes continually flicker toward the water. There was something in those eyes, something urgent, like she had a mission of her own, something that demanded to be understood. He stood up slowly, walking to the stern of the ship where the fog seemed thickest. The crew remained close to Bella, watching her with increasing worry. She wasn't just tired, she was desperate. "Do you think she's looking for someone?" Mark asked quietly, following Reed's gaze toward the grey horizon. Reed didn't immediately respond. He had thought the same thing, but it seemed almost impossible. Who could have survived out here? And if someone had, what were the chances they were still alive? "I don't know," Reed finally said, his voice low. "But something tells me she's trying to tell us something." The crew looked at each other uneasily. They were out here for a routine fishing trip, and now they had a dog on board that seemed to be on a mission of its own. For the next hour, the fog only seemed to grow thicker, the sea more unsettled. The seabird drifted through the mist, the crew's routine interrupted as they kept a careful watch on Bella. Yet no one could ignore the growing sense of unease, the feeling that there was more to this story than they had first realized. Suddenly, Bella stood up, unsteadily on her trembling legs. The movement was so abrupt that the crew members nearest her reached out instinctively to steady her. But the dog resisted, pulling away and lifting her head high, as if searching for something or someone. "Captain," Louise called out, a tremor of uncertainty in her voice. "I think she wants us to follow her." Reed's eyes locked onto Bella's, and for a moment time seemed to slow. There was an intensity in her gaze, an unspoken plea. She was no longer just a dog in distress. She was a creature with a purpose, and that purpose was pulling her forward. The crew gathered around, unsure of what to do. Bella's body was weak, her movements unsteady, but there was no mistaking the direction in which she was focused, the same direction the crew had been drifting toward for hours, the horizon that seemed endlessly distant. "What's she doing?" Mark asked, confusion and concern in his voice. Reed glanced at the others. His gut told him to be cautious, but another part of him, the part that had spent a lifetime navigating the seas, knew that sometimes You had to trust instincts. Bella was trying to tell them something. Something important. She's not resting, she's not finished yet, Reed said, his voice firm as he turned toward the crew. We're altering course. The seabird turned slowly, its bow now pointed, toward the direction Bella seemed intent on following. The crew exchanged glances, their uncertainty hanging in the air. They were drifting away from their original course, toward an unknown destination in the endless fog. As the boat glided through the water, Bella paced restlessly at the edge of the deck. She barked occasionally, each time her gaze fixed on the distant horizon, as if urging the crew to move faster. The mist around them seemed to grow denser, yet Bella's determination was unwavering. She's definitely leading us somewhere, Mark said, his voice filled with awe. Reed nodded, his face unreadable. We'll follow her for now. Keep an eye out. They continued their journey, the minutes stretching into hours as they navigated through the thickening fog. There was an eerie stillness around them, broken only by the occasional sound of Bella's barking or the soft hum of the engine. It was as though the world outside of their little vessel had disappeared entirely, swallowed by the endless sea and the impenetrable mist. At one point, when the fog seemed to become too thick to see through, Louise stepped forward, offering a suggestion. Shouldn't we slow down, Captain? Visibility's getting worse. But Reed shook his head. We're not stopping yet. There's something out there. I can feel it. For what seemed like an eternity, the crew moved in silence, following Bella's lead. But just when doubt began to creep in, when they started to question whether they should turn back, the fog began to lift. The water, which had been nothing but grayness for hours, began to shimmer with patches of pale blue as the sun broke through the mist. Then they saw it. Floating in the water ahead of them, a small object bobbing in the waves. It looked like a bag, or perhaps a bundle of some kind drifting aimlessly. Captain, over there, Mark said, his voice barely above a whisper. Reed squinted into the distance, his heart pounding in his chest. Something inside him told him this was the reason they had altered course. This was what Bella had been leading them to. He motioned to the crew to prepare the boat to approach. Slowly and carefully, the seabird neared the object, which was now clearly visible in the water, a backpack, floating lazily on the surface. As they drew closer, Reed could see it wasn't just any bag. There was something familiar about it, something that seemed to hold a connection to the mystery that had unfolded before them. The dog had been so fixated on this spot, and now the moment of truth had arrived. Reed reached over the side of the boat, pulling the backpack aboard. He unzipped it cautiously, knowing that whatever lay inside could change everything. Inside the bag, wrapped in a damp, crumpled piece of paper, was a photograph. It showed a woman, smiling, standing next to a boat. Her face was warm, full of life, her eyes bright with joy. And below the photograph, tucked in the folds of the bag, were several identification cards. One of them read, Dr. Sarah Wills, marine biologist. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. The name struck a chord with Reed, and something inside him stirred a realization that had been hanging in the back of his mind, something he couldn't quite put into words. The photograph, the bag, Bella's. Insistence this was no random occurrence. Bella wasn't just lost, she had been with someone who had been out here in these waters, and now, this very moment, they had uncovered the first clue. We need to radio in, Reed said, his voice urgent. Call for a rescue operation. We've got a missing person on our hands. Reed ordered the crew to continue their search, determined to find any trace of Dr. Sarah Wills. With Bella still by their side, the crew began scanning the waters meticulously. The fog had not completely cleared, but they had now hope fueled by the photograph, by Bella's unyielding determination. As the seabird sliced through the waters, Reed thought back to the first time he had seen the dog. She was a symbol of survival, of loyalty, and of an unbreakable bond between life and death. She had come to them for help, and now they were bound to help her find the one she had been protecting all this time. The seabird drifted through the open waters, its engine hum cutting through the quiet tension. Bella, still alert, never let her gaze wander from the horizon. The crew, despite their exhaustion, kept their eyes on the water, scanning the surface for any signs of the missing marine biologist. Reed stood at the helm, his eyes narrowing as he watched Bella. There was no question in his mind she was leading them to something, to someone. She wasn't just a dog lost at sea. She had a purpose. The intensity with which she had reacted upon their first encounter spoke volumes about the bond she shared with the woman in the photograph, the woman who had vanished after a storm. As they continued to search, the fog rolled back and forth, thickening at times and then parting, like a veil that refused to lift completely. The crew moved with methodical urgency, taking turns on watch. Louise, Mark, and the others felt a growing sense of purpose, each person silently acknowledging that they were now part of something far greater than a simple fishing trip. They were part of a rescue mission, a mission led by a dog who had already shown the courage of a seasoned search and rescue team. Hours turned into a day. The sun dipped and rose again, casting its pale light over the endless ocean. But despite the passing time, Bella's vigilance never wavered. She paced along the deck, sniffing the air, her ears flicking at every sound. It was as if she knew they were getting closer. "Do you think she's leading us towards something specific?" Mark asked one morning, as they stood together on the deck. Reed looked at Bella, his face filled with a mixture of awe and worry. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I believe she's trying to find her owner, and she won't stop until she does." As the crew continued to search, doubts began to creep in. The ocean was vast. The chances of finding someone in these conditions seemed slim. They had radioed in a distress call, but the chances of a rescue team arriving in time were uncertain. Days had already passed, and the hope that once burned brightly began to flicker, dimming under the relentless pressure of the sea. But Bella didn't give up. She didn't rest, not for a single moment. Even when the crew seemed ready to call it quits, she would bark and nudge them, pushing them onward. The crew couldn't ignore her. Each bark felt like a command, an insistence that they were meant to keep going. It was on the 5th day, after nearly giving up, that Bella's reaction shifted. The fog had parted briefly, and the seabird had been drifting quietly. The crew, feeling the weight of exhaustion, were beginning to accept the grim possibility that they might not find Dr. Sarah Wills after all. The horizon remained empty, and despite their best efforts, the search was coming to an end. But then Bella stiffened. She was standing at the edge of the deck, her gaze fixed on something in the distance. Her body tensed, and her ears stood upright, as if she had heard something only she could perceive. Then, without warning, she bolted to the edge of the boat, barking loudly, urgently. "Captain!" Louise shouted, her voice full of panic. "She's reacting, look, she's reacting!" Reed's heart raced as he turned to follow Bella's gaze. For a moment, he saw nothing but the sea, the gentle ripples of water glistening in the early morning light. But Bella's barking grew louder, more insistent, and then Reed saw it, a shape barely visible against the water's surface. "Over there," Reed said, his voice tight with urgency. "Steer toward her." The seabird veered toward the spot Bella had been fixated on. As they got closer, the shape became clearer. It was a small boat, nearly submerged, caught in the shallows near a reef. The boat had been battered, its edges frayed, but there was no mistaking the significance of this moment. This was the thing Bella had been waiting for. Reed's heart raced as they approached the small, half-submerged vessel. Bella, still, barking, paced anxiously around the boat, eyes fixed on the sinking ship. "Stop here," Reed ordered. The crew tied the seabird to the nearby reef and launched a dinghy. As they reached the boat, Reed's hands shook. Inside, a motionless figure, a woman but alive. Dr. Sarah Wills G. Reed gently touched her arm, feeling the coldness. But she was breathing faintly. "She's alive," Reed whispered, signaling to the crew. "Help me get her aboard." With care, they lifted Sarah into the dinghy, and Bella, her tail wagging, barked frantically. The dog's bond with the woman was unmistakable. Once aboard the seabird, Sarah's condition was assessed. She was severely dehydrated, her skin cracked from saltwater exposure, but she was alive. Reed radioed for immediate help, and soon the Coast Guard arrived to take Sarah to the nearest medical facility. Bella stayed by her side, refusing to leave. In the coming days, Sarah recovered physically, but the emotional scars of the storm and the ordeal at sea weighed heavily on her. Bella was there every step of the way, offering comfort and support. "You kept me going when I thought I couldn't," Sarah whispered, stroking Bella's fur. As Sarah healed, the bond between her and Bella grew stronger. Bella wasn't just a dog, she was a lifeline, both physically and emotionally. Sarah knew she owed her life to Bella. After her recovery, Sarah decided to honor Bella's loyalty by enrolling her in therapy dog training. Bella, initially uncertain, soon thrived in this new role. She became a certified therapy dog, helping patients in hospitals, nursing homes, and community centers. Bella's calm and compassionate nature made her a beloved figure wherever she went. News of Bella's heroism spread, and she was hailed as a miracle dog. Despite the attention, Bella remained focused only on Sarah, her devotion unshaken. Sarah and Bella started a foundation to support rescue animals and provide therapy dog services. Bella, once a stray, now had a family of people who needed her just as much as Sarah had. As the years passed, Bella grew older, but her loyalty never wavered. The two continued their work, helping those in need. Sarah often reflected on their journey from the stormy sea to their mission to help others. Bella had saved her life, not just physically, but emotionally. "I don't know where I'd be without you," Sarah would say, watching Bella rest by her side. Together, they had saved each other. Their bond, unbreakable, had withstood the test of time.